Welcome into the Flyers Talk podcast presented by Great Railing. Ashlyn, Sullivan, and Joe Fordyce here with you. Jordan will be here the next episode. It has been a busy week for the Flyers as we get ready for the trade deadline on Friday. A lot of talk of what's going to happen with this Flyers team and confirmation from General Manager Chuck Fletcher today. And breaking news, Joe, the Flyers will be selling at the trade deadline on Friday.
Yeah, a lot of what I've heard come out of this team this week, I think, is things that the fan base and us in the media, things that we knew that they weren't saying, and now they're starting to say it.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess there's an element of that that's refreshing, but it also drives the point home that I don't think this team is any closer to where they want to be than they were a year ago at this time, 2 years ago at this time. And quite frankly, they might be farther away than they were at these times because they have contracts that are sort of holding them down and things like that. So, but you can't go forward until you admit what's going on now.
Yeah.
And I guess this is step one in that process. But I think a lot of people hoped they would be on maybe steps 2 or 3 instead of back at step 1 now, because I think when you look at other teams, and unfortunately you have a couple examples in some of the Flyers' biggest rivals, the Rangers and the Devils started their rebuilds around the same time when the Flyers did, and those got fast forwarded. Now the Rangers sign in Artemi Panarin, they get a generational defenseman in Adam Fox, helps turn things around. The Devils get a superstar like Jack Hughes in the draft with the number 1 overall pick, along with Nico Hischier, who's developed into their captain. And those kind of things fast forward your rebuilds. And the Flyers haven't gotten that yet.
Right.
Their highest draft pick was the number 2 overall in 2017. That turned into being Nolan Patrick. And then in that same draft, you have Hischier as the 1 pick, and then you have the 3, 4, and 5 picks all turned into star players in this league. And Nolan Patrick is
Nolan Patrick.
Yeah. And he's really not playing. Now, all that doesn't have to do with him. He's unfortunately got a lot of head injuries and things like that. So they've been unfortunate, but maybe fortunes will turn in their favor one of these days. I know most fans hope that it'll be this coming draft.
Right. And it's crazy what a difference a month has made, because in January, you did feel like they were making progress and you felt like it was a different team than last year's Flyers. And sadly, now the past 2 days, you have John Tortorella and Chuck Fletcher both admitting, yeah, we're not going to make the playoffs this year, which we already knew, but they don't want to use the term rebuild. And I totally understand why. No coach or GM ever wants to use that phrase, but you're at the point now where Chuck Fletcher, he spoke to the media today at practice, and he said getting younger, I swear, almost 8 times, and just continue to say and point the fact across that the Flyers don't have those playmakers you just mentioned, and they have to figure out a way to get these younger generational talents quickly.
Yeah, and the getting younger thing is a little odd to me because Chuck Fletcher has handed out in the last 4 years, he's handed out a long-term deal to Kevin Hayes, a long-term deal to Rasmus Ristolainen. And I'm not saying these players are old, but they're also not young. They're not.
You're building.
They're
blocks.
no longer up and coming. They've moved on to veteran status, and the same can be said for Travis Sanheim. I said to Jordan a ton of times last year on this podcast, this season, Travis Sanheim had to shed the young player label and turn into the veteran, a guy that this team can rely on. I think he's taken strides in that direction, but this messaging that the team that needs to get younger is a little confusing to me, because the guys who have recently gotten contracts from this team, while they're not older, they're also not like 21 or 22. Right. So it seems to be a shift. And maybe it's a much needed shift. And I mean, if they're able to shed some of these contracts, that's the only way that you're going to move forward. And, the other thing can be said is if they can shed some of these contracts, I think you have to look at the free agent landscape to get a superstar. And the one that's going to be out there is David Pastrnak from the Bruins. Now, I'm sure the Bruins are going to do what they can to re-sign him, but the Bruins have a lot of contracts. I don't know if they're going to be able to afford him because he's going to be getting a hefty price tag.
Yeah.
So I think that's a name to keep your eye on. I don't know whether this team is in position to go out and make that signing because one player, as we've seen, at least not yet, with Connor McDavid, one player doesn't make a team.
Right. You'll get much closer, but
yes,
is it going to make you into the playoffs next season? Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I mean, it's hockey. We have 8 seeds win the cup sometimes, and that generally doesn't happen in the other sports. But you're not going to sign up. There's not going to be a switch where you can just flip it and say, okay, now we're a playoff team.
Because we got that one guy. Right.
And, there's a lot of factors. And I just see from this trade deadline on, a very busy time all the way up until next season for the personnel department within this team. And it has been for the last couple of years. Last year, they traded Claude Giroux. They brought in Owen Tippett, which is looks like to be a key piece of this franchise going forward. They got some draft capital in that. So they need to continue in that direction because JVR's contract is what it is. I'm not sure they're going to really get a ton for, I mean, they'll probably get a mid-round draft pick. But they need to acquire whatever assets they can. And, the landscape of sports now, everybody's talking about tanking and tear it down, and this is the only way you get better. I would argue that this team hasn't done that yet, and that's been somewhat misguided. The aggressive retool has been the term that's come up because Chuck Fletcher said it either last year or a couple years ago or both. It's a tough task to do that. It really is. And the Flyers, they're kind of stuck in the muck of what's happened ever since the bubble playoffs. And I think this is really the first time we've heard them acknowledge this is what we need to do. And it's really, they're not saying tear down, but they need to complete the tear down, I guess, because they've done some of that by trading Giroux, and we all think JVR is going to get moved. And, now Travis Konechny's out. Right. So you really they're really up against it here, and they really have no choice but to go this direction.
Right. Now is the time if you're ever going to do it. All right. You are listening to Flyers Talk. It's brought to you by Great Railing. Stop in Great Railing for the highest quality and lowest prices of all your railing, decking, and fencing needs. All right. Like Joe just said, we had heard that Travis Konechny has been injured for a good amount of time. We don't have an exact timetable, but Chuck Fletcher did say it's going to be at least 3 weeks that we see Travis Konechny back on the ice, and that is if he even gets back on the ice this season. It's disappointing because when Travis Konechny got injured, it didn't seem too intense. And we thought, all right, he's probably going to miss a couple of games. But like we talked about the retooling, you're now in a position, why rush Travis Konechny back? There's 0 point.
Yeah. And what's interesting is even that game that he came out, they said the communication that came out from the team, and this is very vague in the NHL. It's worse than any of the other sports, but was unlikely to return in that game. So we talked about it on post game. That kind of seemed like, okay, maybe it's not that bad. If there was a chance he might come back for this game. That seems to have gone the other direction. And to me, yes, the scoring is a big deal. And he had just started to refine his game after he went through a little lull. But to me, Travis Konechny not being in the lineup really damages the spirit of this team. And I think that's a bigger deal than the scoring, because he's one of those guys that gets the whole team going. He gets under the other team's skin. He draws penalties. And we've heard John Tortorella talk about it. That's his game. And sometimes it's to the detriment of the team, but most times it is not. Most times it is about lifting his teammates, whether it be a goal, a hit, getting under, mixing things up. And without him in there, there's a lack of spark within the whole team up and down the lineup. And I think that's going to be the biggest issue, is getting up for these games when you don't have your main energy guy.
Yeah, your star.
There.
It's the closest thing to a star the Flyers had, for
Yeah.
sure. Opioid addiction is a national public health crisis. The Someone You Know podcast from the Independence Blue Cross Foundation offers inspiring stories that challenge stigma, offer hope, and humanize the disease of addiction. Download the new season 3 of Someone You Know on all major podcast platforms. All right, the Flyers with a little over 20 games left on this season. And like we said, Travis Konechny out for most of those games, and the Flyers not in the playoffs. And John Tortorella yesterday talked a ton about, at this point, he has to change his coaching style to pointing out pride. And that's something he's really going to be paying attention to this next month or so, is who's still putting in the effort. Because I agree that tells a lot about a player. It's going to be hard to get up for these games, for sure. And I liked how he admitted, someone asked the question, when you know you're out of the playoffs, how hard is it to continue to strive and push? And he's like, and most coaches would say, oh, you have to do it, whatever. He was like, yeah, it's hard. You're out of it and you still have to get up every day and take the beating. So I'm curious, what players, because it is their job, show up and prove to John Tortorella that the pride is there.
Well, I think with this Flyers team, there's a mix of players whose future in the league with the team are uncertain.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the drive. I want to make sure I'm on the first line next season. I want to make sure I'm on the team next season. Yeah. I want to make sure that this coach knows I'm a piece of this going forward. Mm-hmm. Just like the Isaac Ratcliffe trade kind of surprised me, because before John Tortorella got here, that was a player that a lot of people talked about up and coming, that he was one of the guys that the organization thought highly of. Mm-hmm. We all get the sense that John Tortorella is heavily involved with the personnel in this team right now, perhaps more than any coach has ever been involved with in this town. And to see him get shipped off for a future consideration, to me, I know he wasn't with the Flyers much at all, but something tells me that that's like a message that this guy doesn't fit. Mm-hmm. And I think this coach has made it clear that if this guy doesn't fit, he's not going to be here.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying just this, but that has been his consistent messaging since he took this job. We need to see who's going to fit here. And, I think that's the motivation to play.
Right.
If guys on this team that have term on their contract that are playing for this coach and playing for spots in this lineup, they need to let their play do the talking and tell this coach that they want to be here, and not only do they want to be here, but they want to be in whatever role they want to be in. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the drive. That's what you need to see over these last 20 some odd games, is who wants to be here and where do they want to be and how do they fit?
Right.
More importantly, because we know the coach is going to be looking at that.
Yeah. Torts mentioned it. Who wants to be on the bus in Philadelphia? So we're going to see who's in those seats. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, he has shown this year, we've seen it. And then in talking to Scott, who played for him, mm-hmm. Nobody's off limits. Everybody is susceptible to being benched or being dropped in the lineup or whatever the case may be. This coach is willing to do it. And it doesn't matter if you are the top center on the team or the extra forward or extra defenseman. Everybody is sort of treated on an equal playing field when it comes to this coach and putting in effort mm-hmm. and showing that you want to be there.
Right. Catch all the sports action and more at Rivers Casino Philadelphia. Whether it's the money line or the pass line, there's something for everyone, including a great sports book. Rivers Casino Philadelphia. Philly loves a winner. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. All right, one more point to make on this podcast from Chuck Fletcher as well today. He mentioned some guys, some building blocks, and he mentioned, of course, the Travis Konechny, that he was never going to be ever able to be traded at this point this year. Joel Farabee, Owen Tippett. And those are really the only guys that he mentioned, at least today, of young guys that he really feels like need to be a Flyer. So these last 20 or so games, what questions do you have for the remaining players on this team of guys that you think need to be here?
Well, I mean, the immediate questions are the trade potential.
Yeah.
I think Ivan Provorov is a big question. To me, he is a guy that seems like a fresh start somewhere else would really benefit him, and I think the Flyers could get something for him. Will that happen? I don't know, but and I mean, I think I have the same question everybody has about Joel Farabee is, was it just the lack of off-season training that has caused this to, we've seen small windows where we saw the player that he was before, but for the most part, he's looked like a guy that ran out of gas at different times during the season and just wasn't there. He wasn't a force. He wasn't noticeable. He certainly was not a shell of a player that this team was going to rely on for goals, which they have before. And really coming into the season, we talked a lot about how this team lacks scoring. It wasn't a mystery to anyone. And he was going to be one of the guys that they counted on for scoring. And he hasn't scored since January 7th or 9th or something like that. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, you have, I think Nick Delorier has 3 goals in the time since Joel Farabee has scored his last goal. And Nick Delorier is a guy that, I mean, going into the season, you didn't know if he could have 3 goals on the year, let alone 3 in the time since Farabee scored his last goal. So it's just, it's been a weird season for Joel. And I think that's a big question. Owen Tippett, my question for him is nothing negative at all. My question for him is, what is his ceiling?
Yeah.
How much better can he get? Because to me, he's been better this year than I thought he could be last year when they got him. So can he be that power forward? We heard Al talking about it the other night on either pre or post game about him developing into that power forward, a guy that just causes havoc in front of the net. He's got a great shot. We saw that the other night. So to me, the arrow's pointing up for Owen Tippett. Joel Farabee, it remains to be seen. I mean, because the proof is going to be, assuming he gets out of the season and he's healthy, because hockey's notorious for the season ends and then you start hearing about this laundry list of surgeries that all these guys needed. And then you go, oh, well, that's why he looked so bad during the season.
Right.
Assuming that Joel Farabee comes out of this season and we don't hear about an injury that he was dealing with other than recovering from the surgery he had last offseason, if he gets that full offseason in and comes back next year, we need to see production from him, or else the questions about his future are really going to start then. So, and then just how is this team going to clear the space needed to infuse the roster with more talent, more scoring? I feel like their defense that we thought was set up for the future, I'm not so sure it is anymore, particularly if they're shopping or considering trading Ivan Provorov and Tony DeAngelo. I mean, those are 2 guys that are under contract for next season. So, Sanheim's going to be there. Ristolainen's going to be there. And I mean, I don't know. Is Nick Seeler going to be there? Because it seems like Nick Seeler's a commodity now because he's not making a ton of money and he's played very well for the Flyers this season. I mean, it seems to me like this entire roster is
question mark.
Yeah. I mean,
big one.
Right. Because before the season, I think we would have said, regardless of how he plays, Kevin Hayes is going to be here because of the number that he makes and the years left on his deal. Well, now all of a sudden, they're shopping Kevin Hayes.
Yeah.
Now, will somebody take him?
5
Who
Chuck
knows?
Fletcher today.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you trade him, the chances of you getting anything are slim because you're probably going to have to pick up some of his contract. There's nobody that's trading for the rest of his deal in full. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen. It won't happen in this era of the NHL with the salary cap the way it is. It's just not going to happen. And so it's almost as if the things that we said we could count on looking forward, all of a sudden those things are also somewhat questionable now. But I'm not necessarily certain that the fan base has a problem with that.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that they liked, as a whole, the pieces that you could count on. I'm not sure that they were totally in love with those pieces to start out with.
Right.
It's not like you had like we talked earlier about the Devils and Jack Hughes. It's not like you have a McDavid. You don't have, like, who are you building around? You don't have that yet.
You have a couple okay pieces, but a solidified A+ piece, yeah, you don't have that.
And I think everything we've heard from John Tortorella all year is saying, we don't know what we're building around yet. That's what I'm trying to find out.
And sadly, I still don't think they know that.
I don't think they know.
That's the most aggravating part right now, is it's March and you still don't know. And this whole year was supposed to be about learning that.
Yeah, it was. And I think what they learned is they have what you just said. You have some okay pieces.
Yeah.
But okay pieces are good for your bottom 6 forwards and maybe your third pair of defense or second, but they're not good for your top power play, your top 6 forwards, your top D pair. Okay is going to have you mired in purgatory in this league, just like it does in every other sport.
Well, it'll be this year, 5 times. It's just repeating it over and over and over again, which I understand is maddening to fans and the people working the shows as well.
Right. And really, I mean, if you look at it, other than the bubble playoffs, when it really seemed like they could get something done, and they run into this Islanders team that has been the thorn in their side for a number of years now, they've kind of been stuck in this middle area since they made the Stanley Cup final 12 years ago.
Right.
They've had playoff appearances, their first round exits. They haven't won a playoff series since 2012. And the first round appearances that they made were outside of the bubble were less than ceremonious, let's say. I mean, a first round exit against Washington, a first round exit against Pittsburgh in 2 series that really, I mean, I don't know that anybody expected them to win.
Yeah.
And that's really what it's been for the last decade plus here. And this franchise, you can't sell this franchise on first round exits in the playoffs. That's not, it's just not what we're here for. And it's not what fans here got used to. And I feel like they've been chasing to capture the magic of the 2010 team since 2010.
Yeah.
I really do. I mean, that team had the personalities. We work with one of them now that the fans gravitated toward. And we've talked about the energy that surrounded that team and the fans packing the building to watch a road game on Fanavision and all those sort of things. And I just feel like this team's been chasing that and at the same time chasing the energy of the other teams in town.
Yeah.
I mean, the Phillies World Series, the Eagles win a Super Bowl. They just made another Super Bowl. The Sixers have been consistently in the playoffs and have people thinking they really have a chance to make a run at a championship. And then the Flyers just seem like they're kind of lost behind all that. And they used to be the trendsetter in this city for a long time. And that just hasn't been the case for the last decade plus. And I would say the fan base is more than desperate to be back to that stage. And
it ain't going to happen tomorrow.
No, it's not going to happen tomorrow. No, that's for sure.
Whole lot of questions around these Philadelphia Flyers right now. They are back in action tomorrow night against the Rangers. That game is on TNT. We will be back NBC Sports pre and post game live on Sunday against the Red Wings. Puck drop is at 6:00 Sunday night. So thank you for tuning in to Flyers Talk podcast presented by Great Railings for Joe. I am Ashlyn. Jordan will be back next week. Have a great afternoon.